Hello everyone, this is Mr. Melendez, and in this video we're going to talk about how to count rhythms. As I always say, in percussion we do two things, count and hit something. So learning how to properly count rhythms is one of the most important things we learn as percussionists. Everything discussed in this video come from my personal methods and ideas about rhythms that come from my experience as a performer and as a teacher. But that doesn't mean that this is the only way that it can be done. Learning something new is a very personal experience, so if something doesn't work for you, try out a new method or just create one for yourself. Be sure to leave any questions in the comments down below so we can discuss anything that I missed or anything you're confused about. All right, let's get started. This is a rhythm tree most of you have seen in your band rooms or in method books. This rhythm tree breaks down a whole note to 16th notes. In order to understand how these rhythms relate, you need a basic understanding of fractions. Let's take the number 100. Now divide 100 in half. The result is two equal parts that are half of the original number. Now let's take those numbers and divide them in half. The result is now four equal parts that are a quarter of the original number. Now let's take those numbers and divide them in half. The result is now 8 equal parts that are an eighth of the original number. Now taking those last numbers and dividing them in half, the result is now 16 equal parts that are a 16th of the original number. Now let's try something a little more tangible. You order a large pizza for the table. If two people want to eat an equal amount of pizza, you would cut the pizza in two equal halves. So everyone is eating a half of the original pizza. If four people want to eat an equal amount of pizza, you would cut the pizza into four equal slices. So everyone is eating a quarter of the original pizza. If 8 people want to eat an equal amount of pizza, you would cut the pizza into 8 equal slices. So everyone is eating an eighth of the original pizza. If 16 people want to eat an equal amount of pizza, you will cut the pizza into 16 equal slices. So everyone is eating a 16th of the original pizza. This process can go on and can be applied to musical notes and rhythms. Musical notes are symbols to tell the player how long or short a note is. In this rhythm tree, the whole note represents the longest note and the 16th note represents the shortest. So think of the whole note as the number 100 or the large pizza in the examples we discussed. If we take the whole note and divide it into two equal parts, the results are two half notes. Take the two half notes and divide each into two equal parts. The results are now four quarter notes. Take the quarter notes and divide each into two equal parts. The results are now 8 eighth notes. Take the eighth notes and divide each into two equal parts. The results are now 16 16th notes. Based on these principles, we now know that a whole note is the same amount of space as two half notes, four quarter notes, 8 eighth notes, and 16 16th notes. Before we jump into how to count these rhythms, let's do a review on some musical terms. A measure of music is indicated by bar lines. Each measure has a limited number of notes or rest that can fit within the measure before having to move on to the next measure. Most of the music you will encounter will have a combination of notes and rest. If the notes tell the players what to play, then the rest are the symbols to tell the player when not to play. The rest is the silence between the notes. At the beginning of the measure, there are two numbers stacked on top of each other called the time signature. The top note shows how many beats are in the measure. If the top note says 4, then you will count from 1 to 4. If the top note says 19, then you will count from 1 to 19. This top number can be any whole number from 1 to infinity, but we try to keep it as simple as we can for the musicians. The bottom number is what length of note, whole note, half note, quarter note, etc., gets the beat. The sound you hear is coming from a metronome. The metronome click is what we refer to as the beat. Each time the metronome clicks, the player counts to the designated number like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. To figure out which type of note gets the beat, we have to think back to the fractions. If you were to take the fraction 4/4 and replace the top number with 1, you would get the fraction 1/4 or a quarter. We see that 4/4 is telling the player that the quarter note is what the metronome is clicking. If you were to take the fraction 2/2 and replace the top number with 1, you would get the fraction 1/2 or a half. And 2/2 is telling the player that the half note is what the metronome is clicking. The bottom number corresponds to the fractions we see in the rhythm tree. So the bottom number can only be 2, 4, 8, or 16. If the time signature says 4/4, it is telling the player that there are 4 beats within the measure. And the quarter note is what gets the beat, aka what the metronome is clicking. Now let's go back to the rhythm tree and break it down. Let's start with the whole note. According to the rhythm tree, the whole note fills the entire measure because it equals 4 beats. So you would count the measure like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Only striking the instrument on beat 1. Now if we were to replace the whole note with half notes, we could fit 2 notes within the measure. So we would count the measure like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Striking the instrument once on beat 1 and once on beat 3. If we were to replace the half note with quarter notes, we could fit 4 notes in the measure. So we would count the measure like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Striking the instrument on each beat. If we were to replace the quarter note with 8 notes, we can fit 8 eighth notes in the measure. Once we get past quarter notes, we count the rhythms differently to make it easier to say as we play. So we would count the measure like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Striking the instrument 8 times in total. If we were to replace the eighth notes with 16th notes, we could fit 16 notes in the measure. Just like eighth notes, we count 16th notes differently to make it easier to say as we play. So we would count the measure like this: 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and The same principle can be applied to rest as well. A whole note is 4 beats of sound, and a whole rest is 4 beats of silence. A half note is 2 beats of sound, and a half rest is 2 beats of silence. A quarter note is 1 beat of sound, and a quarter rest is 1 beat of silence. An eighth note is half a beat of sound, and an eighth rest is a half a beat of silence. And a 16th note is a quarter of a beat of sound, and a 16th rest is a quarter beat of silence. Let's break down a few musical examples using what we learned about notes and rest. On the screen now are 2 charts. The one on the left is all of the notes: whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note. The one on the right is all of the rest: whole rest, half rest, quarter rest, eighth rest, and 16th rest. And right in the middle is a exercise that I wrote specifically to show a couple things. And if you're interested in following along with this, you can go down to the description box where this will be linked so you can follow along. On this example sheet, I have a list of all of the different notes, the way that they would look like written inside of music software, as well as all of the rest and how those would look like as well. So we're going to go through and basically break down what we need to do in order to be able to count this the correct way. Starting with measure 11, I'm going to go ahead and do one extra thing that you don't really need to do most of the time, but right now there is no time signature, so I'm just going to write in 4/4, so that way we remember that we're in 4/4. So according to the rhythm chart, half notes have 2 beats. And in order to complete the entire measure, you would need 4 entire beats. So if we have 2 on each, starting on beat 1, you have 1, 2 whole beats. And then starting on beat 3, you have 3, 4. Something to note for this is that if you're playing on a percussion instrument, most of the time, if you strike the instrument, it's not going to hold out for 2 beats. It's not going to hold out for 4 beats most of the time. So when you're doing this, just make sure you're counting the full beat and not really playing all the way through. You're just going to play on beat 1 and play on beat 3. All right, so let's move on to the second measure. We have another half note starting right on beat 1. As you can see, there's nothing before, and here's a bar line right here and a bar line right here. So now we have beat 1 that has 2 beats to it, for this half note. And now we have beat 3, nice easy quarter note you got there, and then beat 4. So now this entire measure has been completed. Again, the half note has 2 beats, quarter notes both get 1 beat each. So now we're at the third measure. So still breaking this down, we have 2 bar lines right here to tell us that within this measure there's only 4 beats. Now, something to think about is also what's happening right here. Eighth notes are counted as 1 and 2 and 3, and depending on what beat it lands on. So let's now go back to the beginning of this and check where this lands on. So we have a quarter note, easy, beat 1. We have quarter note on beat 2. Now this lands on beat 3, and we're going to write this as 3 and. And of course, the last one to finish this one out is going to be beat 4. And again, something to remember is that when you're looking at the eighth notes, the way you can differentiate between them is just that solid line at the bottom, or even if it's drawn at the top like this, it'll still have a solid line connecting them. If there were 16th notes, it would be 2 solid lines. We're introduced to our first rest in this exercise. So here is a quarter rest. Here is the last measure, and the first beat is a quarter rest. So this is going to still be considered beat 1, but you are not going to play it. So what I typically do is just keep parentheses right around the note just to remind myself not to play that note. And of course, since this is a quarter rest, we're going to, that fills up the entire beat, and now we're on to beat 2. And of course, we have something that looks very similar to something we played just in the measure before. So this starts on beat 3 and plays on the and of course, it's 8 notes again because it has a solid line in between. And now here we are at beat 4, and now we've completed the first line. I'm going to go ahead and scoot back to the beginning of this section, and I'm going to clap and play where I see the beats. So if a half note comes up, I'm only going to strike when the actual note is, what beat the actual note plays on, and I'm not going to play any notes in between. And of course, when the eighth notes come up, I got to make sure to play the ands that I say as well. So here's the first 4 measures. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So something to note is on that rest, you got to make sure again not to play on that rest. You're still counting the full value. Sometimes it gets a little tricky because as the rest gets smaller, it's kind of hard to place it, but just make sure you get right. You keep that right on beat 1. Now starting on the next line, this is measure 15. I'm just gonna again put a little reminder out for myself that we are in 4/4, which means again that the quarter note gets the beat, right? The quarter note is what's clicking on the metronome, and there's only 4 beats per measure. So this is our first whole note that comes up, and of course this is gonna have to be 4 entire beats as dictated by the as notated by the rhythm chart. So let's go ahead and count that as 1, 2, 3, 4. You are not technically playing all the way through, but it's important to know that this is an entire 4 beats. So if you were playing this, let's say on the cymbal, you will crash and it would ring for 4 beats. But if you were playing this on the snare drum, you would strike once, according to this, strike once, and then that'll be what is held for 4 beats, unless of course it is rolled. In this case, it is not. So moving on to measure 2, you have, of course, beat 1. Here's the bar line right here, bar line right here. This one starts on beats 1, so we're going to bring this here, beat 1, 2, because of course the half note has 2 beats, and this one is on beat 3 again, and this looks very familiar because these are 8th notes connected by 1 bar line here, and that becomes 3, and lastly ends up on 4. Very good. Now moving on to the next measure. Here is another half note, of course, nothing on beat 1, so that means that beat 1 is the half note, 2 whole beats, and now we've come up to a new rest. This is the half rest, which means it's going to take up the same amount of space as the half notes, but there's going to be silence, of course. So we're going to bring this as 3, write this as 3, 4, put some parentheses, just remind yourself, do not play there, right? And then I think this is the last one for this line. Here is the last measure. Here's a bar line. Here's a bar line to tell us where this starts and ends. And of course, we have a quarter note right on beat 1. Nothing is before, so that means that this is beat 1, and it takes up the entire space before it gets to the next quarter rest, which is going to be beat 2 with some parentheses so you don't play it. Then we have a quarter note again, and this time it's going to be all the way on beat 3. And now skipping ahead from there, we are now at beat 4, but this is silent. So we're going to put a little parenthesis there just to remind yourself. All right, so scooting back to the beginning of this line, we're going to play the entire 4 measures again, counting all the way through. Some things to think about, of course, is that the whole note takes up 4 beats, but you're not going to play all 4 beats. You're going to play just on beat 1. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Very good. So as you can see again, the trickiest part about this one was not all the extra notes. It was all the space in between. We have big space over here. Then we have big space here. Another huge amount of space. There's a lot of empty space in this one that requires the player to make sure they're counting all the parts in between. All right, so here we are on the 3rd line. Here's a reminder again that we are in 4/4. So this next section is going to introduce some 16th notes as well as some different rest as well. So first things first, here is beat 1. Of course, we have beat 1 here. There's nothing before it, means this is beat 1. We have 1 and, of course, because these are 8th notes connected by 1 line. But now we have arrived to beat 2. Right, and this is all bracketed together so we can tell that it's beat 2. It also has 2 lines, which tells us these are 16th notes. And if we remember back, 16th notes are counted as 2, E, and 2, E, and So when you're counting this in time, you have to make sure to say all of these words, 2, E, and before the next click. 2, E, and 3, right, before the next click. Speaking of, beat 3 is here. We have 8 notes again, so it's 3 and 4. 3 and 4 to finish this off. So here's a bar line here. Let's go ahead and scoot. Here's the second bar line. This is now, again, beat 1 is right in this area. So we have 1 and 2. This is 1 quarter note, which means that this is going to lead to beat 3. Which is a quarter note, which leads to beat 4. There's no ands or anything in there. So let's now move over to the next measure. Here's the next bar line right there. So now we have, again, 4 beats to worry about, 2 of which are, there's 2 signs here that tell me that these are rests, right? And they're quarter rests again. So they're going to be on beat 1. Then we have a quarter note on beat 2. Then a quarter rest on beat 3. And we have a quarter note on beat 4. So that's how you get that situated, nice and simple. Let's go to the last one on this line. Here's this bar line. So of course this needs to have 4 notes, 4 beats in it. And we have 4 full beats from the quarter notes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We scoot back to the beginning of this line. We're going to go ahead and play it. A couple things to make sure we're thinking about is this 16th note. Got to make sure it is 2 E and a 3, right? It has to fit within that second beat. All right, let's go ahead and count and play. 1 and 2 and ready and go. And 1 and 2 E and a 3 and 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one, again, the tricky part of it is getting that 16th note and understanding how to count it. The best advice that I can give you about that is to sit with the metronome and listen for the click. And every single time that you land on a number, aka 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to hear a click. So as long as you line up the number with the click, you should be good to go. Here's the last line. This one, of course, friendly reminder one more time that we are in 4/4. And this time we're starting off with no music on this line, or on this in the beginning of this measure here. And we have our one of our new rests as well. This one is a whole rest, and you can tell because it is upside down. The hat is upside down, and the upside down hat, or the the upside down rest, which everyone sees as a hat, that will tell you that there's going to be 4 beats of silence. So the entire measure is full. All you need to do now is just put in these numbers and then remind yourself that you are not playing them. All right, so the next 2 measures are really tricky, but not for what you play. It's actually for what you don't play. And in this case, we know that this is in fact beat 1 because here is a bar line and here's the bar line. So we know that this is the beginning. It has to be beat 1, but this rest here is an 8th rest. So typically this would look like this, right, where you have the 2 8th notes that are connected, but this time they, instead of playing the 8th note, they have replaced it with an 8th rest. And this, of course, is the easiest way to think about this, is to think, all right, if these were 8th notes connected together, how would I play it? And now that we know how you play it, we're going to count this as 1 and, but this time we're not playing beat 1. Okay, so moving on to beat 2, we have, of course, 2 and, very simple. Going now to beat 3 is 1 quarter note, which takes up the whole space. And here's beat 4, which takes up the whole space, 1 quarter note. And let's go ahead and scoot on down to the next one. Here is the bar line. Here's the bar line. All right, so now we have 2 rests that are both 16th rests. And of course, you can tell they're 16th rests because they have 2 flags on them, just like how there are 2 flags on the 16th notes. So what you want to do is count this exactly the same way you would count 16th notes. So if you were just if you saw 2 16th notes by themselves starting on beat 1, you would count that as 1 E, right? But in this case, because they're not 16th notes, they are rest, we are not going to play them, but we're still going to count them. So of course, what I did right now is draw on top what it would look like, but of course these 2 do not exist, right? So we would count this as 1 E and without the 1 E. So we're going to put parentheses around that, but we're still saying it, we're just not playing it. And now, of course, we're on beat 2, which is a quarter note, fills up the whole space. Beat 3 is a quarter note, fills up the whole space. Here is now beat 4, and, of course, we know that because of the 1 bar that's connecting the 2 notes. And, of course, the last set of notes here are all 16th notes, all 16th. So we count this as 1 E and then 2 E and 3 E and lastly 4 E and of course, as you were playing this, if you were reading this for the first time or figuring out how to read music for the first time, try to get your hands and your words to line up as much as possible. The phrase I always say is, if you can say it, you can play it. So if you can say the rhythms that are written on here, just like how you would sing a song or anything like that, it would be the easiest way to do this. Okay, so here we are. We're scooted back to the beginning of this section, to the beginning of line 4, and we're going to play all of line 4. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 E and a 2, 3, 4, and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a stop. All right. So that concludes what this would look like. Again, if you were to break this down, I would recommend breaking it down just the same way we did every single time that you have music, until you get a lot better with sight reading or get a lot better with preparing music. I know that this is something I still do if there's a lot of complex rhythms in the music. Luckily, this didn't have a lot of complex stuff for me, but if this is complex for you, take your time, go back and see how I figure this out. And if you have any questions on any of how this works, please leave them down in this comment section below. I look forward to doing more of this. So if you do like this kind of video, give it a like and comment down below any questions or what you want to do next. I would love to continue reading some music and breaking it down. We can move on to mallets or anything like that. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.